Alright everyone, welcome back, and we're continuing our discussion on Mendelian genetics, and today we're going to look at a couple more of Mendel's hypotheses for genetic inheritance. And we're going to start with the fact that for every inherited character that we have, every trait that we have, hair color, eye color, height, the organism has at least two genes, two alleles that control that character, and they get those alleles, one from each parent. So for every gene, that locus, that location on a chromosome is actually represented twice, which should make sense. We've got homologous chromosomes that carry the same information, and those homologous chromosomes, we get that double set, one from mom, the other one from dad. So when we look at your genotype, we've got to look at it as representing the genes that are present in the organism as a result, the genes that were originally passed from the mother plus the gene that was passed from dad. So when we write these genotypes conventionally, it's always two genes, so it's always two letters. All right, one of those letters or one of those genes comes from the mother, one of the genes, the other letter comes from dad, and so the two genes that are represented, or the two letters that are represented, are what we see in the offspring itself, and that's what we talk about as its genotype. So genotypes in conventional Mendelian genetics look like one of the three possibilities below. Either they're two capital letters, there's a capital plus a lowercase, or there's two lowercase letters. And each possible combination, we should know, has different terms that are associated. Homozygous, these are the genotypes that have the two of the same, right? Homo means same, so either two capitals or two lowercases. Homozygous organisms are also historically been called purebred organisms because they only show that trait and can only pass on that allele or that version of the trait itself. Heterozygous then, hetero means other, and so they're going to have a multitude or a different combination of those two letters. So one will be capital, one will be lowercase. And historically, these guys have been referred to as hybrids. They are a combination of the two traits, which means they can then pass on one or the other when they go to have offspring. So homozygous is two capitals, heterozygous is a capital and a lowercase. Homozygous can also mean two lowercase letters. All right, and these are the genotypes. These are the actual genes or the actual alleles that are present in the organism's genetic makeup within its DNA code. But then Mendel also comes in and says, all right, well, because each organism has two alleles for each trait, then how do we know which allele gets expressed? And that's where we talk about dominant versus recessive. So in order to show a dominant trait by traditional Mendelian genetics, that heterozygote organism will always show the dominant because it has one capital letter, because it has a dominant allele. So homozygous recessive, in order to show that recessive trait, you have to have both copies. All right, so dominant will always show through, will literally dominate or overexpress over the recessive trait, unless all that's present is the recessive itself. So again, one allele masks or hides the other. That's your dominant. The one that gets hidden is your recessive. And so we conventionally use capital versus lowercase letters to represent what's the dominant feature versus what's the recessive. So capital is the dominant, recessive is the lowercase. So your dominant gene is the one that overshadows the other. So let's take an example. Your Angus cattle, black is dominant. So that means genotypically that black cattle can either be homozygous dominant, so two big B's, or it can be heterozygous, the big B, little b. Red cattle, on the other hand, are recessive, and so these guys can only be two lowercase, so long as I mate two red cattle together, I will always get red cattle. But if I mate two black cattle together, that doesn't necessarily guarantee I can't get a red one if they are both heterozygous individuals. the recessive gene is the one that gets overshadowed. As a result, you need to have an organism have both lowercase letters or both recessive alleles in order to be showing the recessive trait. Okay, so example, black wool is recessive to white. All right, so a white sheep can either be homozygous dominant, so 2 capital W's, or can be heterozygous. But that black sheep, always recessive. Okay. So we're talking about genotypes, but we're also relating them to the phenotype. So we're talking about the coat color, the fur color, the wool color, and us, blue eyes, striped fruit, yellow flowers, doesn't matter. Whatever the organism looks like, that's its phenotype. But it's all based on what its alleles are in its genotype. Alright, so here's kind of that comparison. So when we look at this, your phenotype is the actual color it is. So purple flowers versus white. When we do phenotypic ratios, here's your traditional Mendelian genetics. Alright, 3:1 is the ratio, assuming we mated 2 heterozygous individuals together. But I can also talk about genotypic ratios. So here's my homozygous dominant, here's the 1, my 2 heterozygous, 2, and my homozygous 1. So my genotypic ratio is a 1 to 2 to 1 versus the phenotypic being 1 to 3 to 1.